I'm Davy, and I'm awesome! And welcome to Davy's Awesome Movies, where I review the styles of movies that I love, the alternative, B-rated, cult style flicks. And this week it's another movie from the king of the cult flicks. In fact, I've done other movies of his in the past. It's time for his very first movie, his debut film. This movie was made in 1953, and it was written and directed by Edward D. Wood Jr., and produced by George Weiss, and distributed by Screen Classics. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the golden gems of trashy cult flicks, Glen or Glenda. And funny enough, in Edward's very first movie, we open with a legendary classic actor, the original Dracula himself, Bela Lugosi, as a character named the Scientist.
Drawing from the endless reaches of time.
We also open with some stock footage. Now back to the Scientist.
Life has begun.
You may be wondering, what the hell does this have to do with the story? Well, let me tell you right now. Absolutely nothing. Then we combine the Scientist and the stock footage.
Pull the string.
Pull the strings! Pull the strings! Then after 6 minutes of nothing to do with the story, we finally get to the story. Starting with a police officer, Inspector Warren, reading the suicide note of a crossdresser who explains that the reason he killed himself is because of all the legal trouble he was facing.
Because I, a man, was caught on the street wearing women's clothing.
Yeah, weirdly enough, in 1953, they could arrest somebody just for cross-dressing. Then the Inspector Warren, played by Lyle Talbot, goes to see a Dr. Alton, played by Timothy Farrell. This was both of their first times working with Ed Wood, neither of their lasts. Lyle Talbot would go on to be in Jailbait, whereas Timothy Farrell would go on to be in both Jailbait and The Violent Years.
I need advice.
Okay, I'll give you some advice. Stop doing Ed Wood movies. The advice Warren needs from Dr. Alton is about cases like the guy who killed himself for being a crossdresser. He wants to learn more about them and understand them so that maybe he can help prevent these kinds of suicides in the future. Which shows that he must be a really caring cop.
You're referring to the suicide of the transvestite?
Okay, I know some of you were starting to get offended. Calm down. In 1953, it was not considered offensive. And really, even now, you shouldn't be getting offended because it is the medical term for a man who wants to dress and present himself as a woman. It's kind of like the word retarded. If you call somebody who isn't retarded because you want to say they're stupid, that's offensive. But if you say, hey, the student you're working with is legally retarded, that's not offensive. That's his medical condition. Dr. Alton says that he knows of two particular stories of men with the same desire to present themselves as women. Inspector Warren wants to hear these stories.
Only the infinity of the depths of a man's mind can really tell the story.
Well, then just do your best. Okay, sure, if it'll help, use more stock footage. And hey, Bela Lugosi can help you too.
The story is begun.
Has begun. Has. I know you're Hungarian, but has. Then we go to Dr. Alton narrating, and he's mostly talking about people's objections to sex changes, using examples of people who were against cars when they first came out, and airplanes when they came out.
If the Creator wanted us to fly, he'd have given us wings.
Well, who cares about that opinion? That was clearly Norman Bates pretending to be his mother. Then we meet the lead, Glen. Or Glenda.
This person is a transvestite, a man who is more comfortable wearing girls' clothes.
That is Glen / Glenda, played by Ed Wood himself, who in the credits casted himself as Daniel Davis, but that's Ed Wood, who jumped at the opportunity to make this film when he found out that Screen Classics wanted to do a film about somebody named Christy Jorgensen who had gotten national exposure for getting a sex change themselves. He jumped at the opportunity and wrote the script because he felt a personal affinity to it, considering that he himself, in real life, was a crossdresser. The issue with Glen is that he doesn't want to change his sex, he just wants to wear women's clothing. Kind of like Ed Wood's issue.
Glen is engaged to be married to Barbara, a lovely, intelligent girl.
Barbara is played by Dolores Fuller, who at the time was Ed Wood's real-life girlfriend. And it was around the time of making this movie that Ed Wood did unveil to his live-in girlfriend, Dolores Fuller, that he was in fact a crossdresser. They later did break up, but Dolores Fuller swears that it really had nothing to do with his cross-dressing.
How about joining me for an after-dinner drink?
Oddly enough, Fuller said the biggest reason for breaking up with him was because of his drinking. We'll get more into that later. Then Dr. Alton goes into some reasons why men would want to wear women's clothing.
These are the things provided for his home comfort.
Not true. I don't ever sit around in a suit. I usually sit around in either basketball shorts or sweatpants. Very comfortable.
Men's hats are so tight they cut off the blood flow to the head, thus cutting off the growth of hair.
Yeah, they found out later that no, that doesn't really cause baldness. If it did, I'd be bald. Believe it or not, I wear a hat almost everywhere I go. The only reason I don't really wear them in these videos is because they hide my face too much. Maybe I should start wearing them. But then he goes into women's clothes.
That which is designed for her home comfort is comfort.
Okay, those look like pajamas, which I do imagine are very comfortable. But back then, men had pajamas too, which were very comfortable. And if a guy wanted, that's exactly what he could do. He could get home and put on his pajamas. Kind of like when I get home, I take off my work clothes and put on some sweatpants or something. Not only that, but that's a weird reason to give, because they're more comfortable. I hate to break it to you, but I often look at women and think, yeah, they look nice, but I don't ever think they look comfortable. Most of what women wear looks very uncomfortable. And in this case of him being a man and presenting himself as a woman, that means he not only has to wear the women's clothing, but he has to wear a wig and makeup. Whatever reason he wants to do that, fine, but don't tell me it's comfort. To further his point, he starts talking about native tribes, and how in most native tribes, the men would adorn themselves all fancy in order to attract women.
Could it be that the male was meant to attract the attention of the female?
Or could it be that this movie is so ridiculously low budget that they could only afford 3 African-American females to play the tribe women and had to put a Caucasian woman there as the 4th one and hope we wouldn't notice? Then a court case where a woman is complaining about her boyfriend stretching out all of her sweaters, but admits he replaces them.
They didn't last long either.
Okay, if I was that judge, I'd be like, okay, well first, buy your own women's clothing, which solves that problem. And second, don't waste the court's time with these problems again. Glen and Barbara are talking about a story in the paper of a man who wanted a sex change.
Well, some people aren't happy the way they are.
And some people need to learn how to edit. Edit! Some people learn how, some people learn edit. Ooh, Navy SEALs!
Here we are, 2 perfectly normal people.
And believe it or not, it was not cross-dressing that made Ed Wood himself abnormal. Seriously, even in 1953, him cross-dressing was probably the least strange thing about him. Glen is struggling with the secret, though, that he is keeping from Barbara. He wants to tell her, but he's afraid she's gonna leave.
Nothing could be as bad as all that.
Oh yeah? How about Bela Lugosi and a bunch of random buffalo?
Hold the string! Hold the string!
That's pretty bad! Now that we're done with that random moment that had absolutely nothing to do with anything.
Should he tell Barbara of his Glenda now, before the wedding?
Uh-huh. I mean, that is kind of a big deal. You know, honey, I think we should talk about whether or not we want to have children. Honey, I think we should talk about finances. Honey, I think we should talk about our future goals. And by the way, I like to wear your clothing. Then more voiceover and stock footage.
That's why I say perhaps society should be a little bit more lenient with it.
Which is like half of this movie. Just voiceovers and stock footage. Could you imagine somebody just relying so much on their own stock footage? I mean, come on! Then Bella tells us to beware. Beware. Beware of the big green dragon.
He eats little boys.
Puppy dog tails and big fat snails.
There. Take care.
This has nothing to do with anything, but it's creepy and awesome. Then we see this. Glen and Barbara are gonna get married, but who's gonna be the witness? What the f? Is that supposed to be the devil? And why is it that instead of horns, he's got big freaky eyebrows? And Bella's keeping the story going.
Do you eat, little boy?
Not the one we're watching, but a story. Then we cut to some stuff that the producer George Weiss put in the movie because he felt it was going to be too short if he didn't. I have no idea. Some dude whipping the floor. A girl that seems upset about it. Bela Lugosi watching. Vipit good. It's basically just a long montage of fetish stuff and Bela Lugosi making faces. Like that. But sorry guys, in this movie there is no nudity. And after 7 minutes of this, we get back to Ed Wood's movie. Which, oddly enough, is just as weird as the crap we were just watching for 7 minutes. But then Glenda comes out. And Barbara. Who's now Barbara Frankenstein. Or is it Steen? Nope, apparently she's Devil Eyebrows. So the message is, Barbara's the devil. Eyebrows. And just in case none of this was freaky enough.
Beware of the big green dragon that sits on your doorstep.
But finally...
Glen has decided to tell Barbara of his dual personality.
And it's all thanks to Devil Eyebrows. Once Glen finally sits Barbara down and tells her that he is a crossdresser, and then, for no reason at all, well, now that that random moment is over, let's see how Barbara reacts.
I don't fully understand this, but maybe together we can work it out.
And she has a love offering. Angora. Now back to Inspector Warren and Dr. Alton.
Is that the end of the story? Not quite.
Damn it!
The second case is an extremely advanced one.
Well, you better hurry. This movie only has 14 minutes left. Alan/Anne's story is that his mother really wanted a girl, so she raised him as a girl. And his father apparently didn't care. So when he graduated high school and then was drafted into the war, he had to keep it a secret. He had to keep his cross-dressing a secret. The reason I'm not putting a whole lot of clips of Alan's story in here is because it's mostly told over stock footage. Even the part where Alan becomes Anne. When we finally see Anne, apparently Bella doesn't like visitors in his lab. Okay, he doesn't mind, he just wants them to go stand over there. But, whereas Dr. Alton believed that for Alan to become Anne was the best thing, he does not believe that that's what's best for Glen.
Shortly after Glen told Barbara of his love for girls' clothing, he started treatments with me.
Wait, so let me get this straight. This whole time you've been telling Inspector Warren stories about your own patients in intimate details? So apparently doctor-patient confidentiality means nothing to you! You even told him about Devil Eyebrows! Then we go to a session with Dr. Alton, Glen, and Barbara. Dr. Alton has figured out why Glen decided to invent Glenda.
He invented it when he could find no love from his mother and no love from his father.
Of course, it's always the parents' fault. I mean, I can relate. My parents were never funny, at least not on purpose. The only thing that was ever funny was all their terrible quirks, which is why I get so entertained by watching these movies. Dr. Alton gives them advice on how they can fix this.
Love is the only answer. Glenda must be transferred to you.
That should be easy. Barbara also wears Angora. And according to Dr. Alton, Glen eventually did get over it and transferred Glenda onto Barbara. So he was cured.
Glen's case has a happy conclusion.
Yes, a happy ending for Glen.
But what of the hundreds of other less fortunate Glens the world over?
Well, apparently they need to go see you, because you're the only therapist in the world I've ever heard of that's actually cured somebody. So how about one more freaky Bela Lugosi moment?
Snips and snails and puppy duck tail.
Yes, there was no point to you whatsoever in this movie, but I'm glad you're here. So there you have it. That's Glen or Glenda, Ed Wood's first ever movie that he wrote, direct, and he was very passionate about because it spoke to him. This movie was extremely low budget, even for its day and age, at $20,000, which would be roughly the equivalent of just under $200,000 at the time. Can't tell you what the box office was because it had a very limited theater release. But I guarantee you they didn't make their money back. Screen Classics was never a big company. In fact, George Weiss, the producer of this movie, was very, very open about the fact that he didn't make good movies. He made low-budget crap movies that people would go see and hopefully would turn a small profit. He had heard about the story of Christine Jorgensen, who was in the papers for getting a sex change. He decided he could make a movie about it and wanted somebody to make the movie quick and cheap, which Ed Wood did. He shot this in 4 days. But the movie that Ed Wood turned into him was more about himself and his personal issues, being a crossdresser, and he later added the Alan and Anne story very quickly because the distributors of this movie said, well, we want at least one thing in here about somebody actually getting a sex change. So he put that in there within the last 14 minutes. The movie was originally titled I Changed My Sex. It was actually even released in a couple of theaters as I Changed My Sex. It was also released as Her or She and I Live Two Lives. Most popular, though, became Glen or Glenda, which is really the only one you can find now. Which, honestly, I think of all those names is the best one. This movie, nowadays, does spark a lot of controversy. There are people who really love it, and there are people who really hate it. And there are people who really hate it on both sides. See, people who are pro-transgender, some of them love this movie because of the message it gets out, and some of them hate it because they say that this movie makes them all look really crazy. I disagree. It doesn't make them look crazy. It makes Ed Wood look crazy. And let's face it, Ed Wood was, well, if he was rich, he'd be called eccentric. He was a very strange person. This was one of the movies that was very heavily focused on in the Tim Burton movie, Ed Wood, that Johnny Depp starred in. And it portrayed it pretty well, its making and everything. The only thing that wasn't portrayed very well was the character Dolores Fuller. The real Dolores Fuller went on to say that she liked the movie, liked Johnny Depp's portrayal, but didn't like how she was portrayed. She was portrayed as somebody who was just with Ed Wood to get acting parts, which was not true, especially because she supported him before he ever made his first movie. And then made it seem like she broke up with him over him being a crossdresser, which was not true either. As a matter of fact, she stayed with him for quite a while after he had unveiled to her that he was in fact a crossdresser. She did admit that part of his lifestyle was what she couldn't handle. She was a very normal, straight-laced person, and he was extremely eccentric, and of course, eccentric people flock to each other. He had a very long list of friends who were not the normal people. They were society's rejects, kind of like him, and eventually became too much for her, but the main reason she broke up with him was because of his drinking, which as the years went on, got worse and worse, and even the wife he had before he died said he was getting more and more of a mean drunk. But personally, I applaud this film because what I like about it is whether you're pro-transgender or anti-transgender, this movie, it's him presenting his side, but not in a very mean, bullying way. Not saying agree with me or you're a horrible person, but ultimately it seemed like he was just trying to start a dialogue, which was very, very ballsy, especially back then. This was 1953, when this was really not talked about. It was decades ahead of its time, almost half a century, considering we really didn't start talking about this stuff until maybe the late 80s, early 90s. Not only that, but this movie was a favorite of David Lynch, and it's the kind of movies that inspired both David Lynch and John Waters. If it wasn't for Ed Wood, there would be no David Lynch, there would be no John Waters, and that would be a real tragedy. So based on that, and just again, if you're like me and love to watch the movies that are just so awful that they're good, check out Glen or Glenda. It's fun. So there you have it. That's my movie review this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit that little bell so you get notifications for when I post new videos, and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought of Glen or Glenda. Tell me your favorite Ed Wood movie. Love you guys.